Okay, great. Thank you, Saranda. Hello, everyone. My name is Starling Hunter, and I am the Chief Research Officer at Join21, which is an Oslo-based company. There's a little bit of background about me. I won't bother you with the details. Just say I was recently a college professor until going into the startup world. Now, again, the title for today is The Business Case for Organizational Network Analysis. I recognize that some of you might be familiar with that term and others not. So just in case you aren't, if you had gone over to Google and had seen and put in this term, you would get a lot of information back. You would see a number of things like are listed here if you have on search suggestions. And again, had you done that, you would come back with a number of articles such as these, going from last week all the way back at least 15 years, right? And you can sort of look at the titles and get a sense of what organizational network analysis is about. Look at this one. It says, here's how org network analysis can keep employees connected. It enables organizations to look beyond hierarchies and drive enhanced collaboration through informal touch points. Or one from CNN Money, the hidden workplace. There's the organization chart, and then there's the way things really work. Some smart companies are bringing power structures out of hiding. Or here's one from Harvard Business Review about 10 years ago, Informal Networks, the company behind the chart. Mapping employees' relationships can help managers harness the real power of organizations. And the craft of connection, O&A is helping companies share knowledge worldwide. So again, you look at these articles, you would get the sense very quickly that organizational network analysis is a tool for mapping organizations as networks of relationships rather than as formal hierarchies. Right? Now, what you might not find out from these articles is that, or discern from them, is that org network analysis rests upon a base of academic research that goes back at least 5 decades, easily into the late 60s. Right? And so if you were to have gone to Google Scholar and take a look there for organization network analysis, you would come back with articles like these. Here's one from 2001 from the very prestigious Academy of Management journal, Social Networks and the Performance of Individuals and Groups, or tie and network correlates of individual performance in knowledge-intensive work, and knowledge sharing in multi-unit companies. So again, there's this notion that there are networks, or if you want to call them social networks within organizations, that are maps of the ways in which people are connected, and academics have been very interested in linking the structure of those connections to performance, not just of individuals, but also of groups and teams and departments and units and so on. All right? Now, one way to summarize all that research and even the practitioner-related articles that we would have seen, that we saw earlier, is this: connectedness matters, right? It matters for individual performance. It matters for group and team performance. It matters for just about any aggregate going up further that you want to take a look at, provided that you measure the connectedness right. Now, the thing that I would say is that if you had done that first search, here's an article you wouldn't have come up with. It's one that was a very nice article in Inc. magazine written by Justin Bariso a few years back. And it says this email from Elon Musk to Tesla employees describes what great communication looks like. Right? And what I like about this article, and the reason I want to start it out, is not just because Musk is currently one of the world's richest men and most well-known and innovative leaders and so on, but because he doesn't use the word organizational network analysis at all. And yet, in his very succinct and intelligent way, he zeroes right in on what are some of its most important aspects. Right? So what I'm going to do, since time permits, is I'm going to read that email to you. It's a very short one, And then we'll talk about that and use that as a jumping off point to talk about a case that we've done recently with a company in Scandinavia. So here goes. Subject, communication within Tesla. There are two schools of thought about how information should flow within companies. By far, the most common is the chain of command, which means you always flow communication through your manager. The problem with this approach is that while it serves to enhance the power of the manager, it fails to serve the company. Instead of a problem getting solved quickly, where a person in one department talks to a person in another department and makes the right thing happen, people are forced to talk to their manager, who talks to their manager, who talks to someone on their team. Then the information has to flow back the other way again. This is incredibly dumb. Any manager who allows this to happen, let alone encourages it, will soon find themselves working at another company. No kidding. Anyone at Tesla can and should be able to email or talk to anyone else according to what they think is the fastest way to solve a problem for the benefit of the whole company. You can talk to your manager's manager without his or her permission. You can talk directly to a VP in another department. You can talk to me. You can talk to anyone without anyone else's permission. Moreover, you should consider yourself obligated to do so until the right thing happens. The point here is not random chit-chat, but rather ensuring that we execute ultra fast and well. We obviously can't compete with the big car companies in size, so we must do so with intelligence and agility. One final point is that managers should work hard to ensure that they're not creating silos within the company that create an us versus them mentality or impede communication in any way. This is unfortunately a natural tendency and needs to be actively fought. How can it possibly help Tesla for departments to erect barriers between themselves or see their success as relative within the company instead of collective? We're all in the same boat. So always view yourself as working for the good of the company and never your department. Thanks, Elon. All right. So again, in a very succinct and non-technical way, without ever mentioning the term organizational network analysis, for all I know, he doesn't know that it exists. He's made a good argument for why connectedness matters. The connectedness that he wants is for people to be able to go across boundaries and formal boundaries rather than along the hierarchy. And the thing that matters, the performance, he sees that the company would be more agile. Possibly there'd be other benefits, and also formal department heads would get to keep their jobs, right? If this, provided they're not doing these things. But I left something out of the article when I first showed you the headline, and it's this part. A newly acquired email from Musk outlines a brilliant philosophy, but it's easier said than done, right? So what I want to do in the time we have remaining is talk about that doing part. What does it actually mean to do this? Yes, it's easy to say, let's communicate directly across boundaries, but how do you actually do that? Well, let's take a hypothetical here for a moment. Let's say that all the department heads have just received this email. In fact, they did if they were there. So let's assume that one of them, Lori Shelby, is particularly concerned and is the first one who beats a path to the door for HR rep and says, I just got that email from Elon about the importance of boundary spanning communication or open communication. And I like my job. I want to keep it. How do I make sure that I'm not impeding communication? How do I make sure that requests that are coming in aren't moving up and along the chain of command, or that I'm not encouraging people to do that, maybe without even knowing it? Well, the able HR rep would have the following thing. They'd say, let's do a pilot study. Well, not that kind of pilot, but in terms of a short study internally of her department. In other words, an organizational network analysis. And the first thing she would need, which would be most helpful, is to have an organization chart. This isn't the one for her, for Lori's department, but for today's purposes, let's assume that it is. So this is her, the large circle A, in the center of this organizational hierarchy. And we see the reporting lines coming up. We'll give her 5 subordinates, each of which have 5 subordinates. So a very idealized structure. But then what will we do? That's only a starting point. We've got the org chart. We want to see how communication and requests for information flow, whether they're following hierarchical lines or not. So right now we're focused just on what's happening in her department. Right? And so we have a lot of options here. The most likely choice, given what the CEO had written, would be to ask everyone in her group who provides you with information you use to accomplish your work. Or we might ask them, who do you go to for information that you need to get the job done? Things like that. But we have other options. We could ask about decision making, who helps you think through a challenging problem, who would you talk to about a new or innovative idea, who are your friends, who do you seek out for advice, who do you trust? Any of those could be used to construct a network of relationships, which could then be studied. Right? So let's say that we had asked, or that the HR rep had asked the question, who do you go to when you seek information to get the job done? So we have what we'll call an information seeking network. Now, people in this network are still located sort of on the map where their departments were drawn, and it makes it a little bit easier to see where the connections are that go across boundaries and which ones stay within. So let's take this as what would have been the outcome of the pilot study. Say all 31 people had responded. Then what do we actually see here? There's a lot of information that's contained in or that can be extracted from a graph like this, right? So let's say we're looking first at Lori in the center and focused on her. We can see that there are information requests coming into her from the green group and from the red group. We can see their information requests. We follow the arrow going out to her from the to the yellow group. That's nice. We notice that what she doesn't have are 20 or 25 arrows coming into her. We actually do see that sometimes. But we don't see that, so we might conclude, okay, Lori, there's a lot of communication that's happening around you, but from looking at this graph, it doesn't appear that everybody thinks that they need to run everything through you. They seem to feel empowered or able to go directly across boundaries in the group without going through you first. So that could give her a little bit of a sense of relief or some insight in that regard. But there's a lot more information that we can extract from here about the rest of the organization. Right? Notice here, you might not have captured it or seen it at first, but here we've got an example of a isolated, in terms of not connected, leader. Right? This is someone to whom no one is sending requests and they're not sending them out. It's possible that there are good reasons for this. Maybe they just transferred in a day or two before the survey was implemented. Maybe you could say they didn't take it, but still someone could have pointed to them, even if they didn't point to anyone else. So if you see something like this, it could be a little cause for concern, or you'd certainly ask some questions around it and wonder, why is this happening? Right? So why do we have isolated people? And there are a few others scattered around the network in this representation. Right? Another thing which you might not have seen, but you can when we highlight it, is that there's at least one silo here. The green group and the red group have no direct connections. There are people who are speaking to both groups. We can see requests going from red to Lori and from green to Lori, but none directly between them. Possibly that's okay, that they don't need, or over the last several weeks or months, that they didn't really need to be in close communication. But if they did, you'd be concerned here, because you have a group that's got a leader that's isolated, and that they also are the only one that have a silo between them and other groups. So these are the kinds of things, of many, that you could extract, information that you could extract from a network graph. Right? So, but what this all doesn't tell us is what's happening with regard to the other departments. There are 8 or 10 other departments here in which her department could be interacting with. How would she know what's going on with regard to those other departments and how her group interacts with those? Well, that is something that we couldn't do with a pilot study. We'd have to undertake a larger study of all the departments and allow people to identify those who they reach out to for information or that they trust or whatever it is in other areas, right? But rather than trying to sort of hypothetically do that, because we haven't worked with Tesla, at least not yet, I'll take you through a little bit of a case study, anonymized, of course, of a company that we have worked with here in the region recently. They're in the B2B sector, and they develop applications for that for their clients. And they are located in one of the four major Scandinavian countries, and where they have a home base of 56% of the 141 employees were there, and they have operations in two others. So taken together, 85% of the people across three major Scandinavian countries, with another 15% spread out in North America and Western Europe. And this was 3 years ago when we first did this analysis. Why I'm telling you about something from 3 years ago, you'll understand shortly. So they were 78% male, 22% female at the time. 62% sales, the people working in sales, 20% in the technology, which was mostly software developers. This should not have said gender, but role, but it was about one formal leader for every 5 individual contributors, so very narrow span of control. And in terms of motivation, there were a large number, 34%, who identified, making money, winning, gaining market share, being competitive as the kind of things that motivate them. Maybe not surprising for when you have a large sales group. A lot of other people who had intrinsic motivation. They were interested in development and self-development, job development, career development goals. And then another 9% who said that they were interested in working around interesting and fun people and, feeling part of a team, which was their primary motivator. And then about another 27% about which we had no information. Right? Now, here's the issue that they were having. High-tech companies are known to have high turnover, and this is no exception. This one, Scantech, is no exception. So in the 3 years since we did our first analysis with them, 61% of the people have left the company. That doesn't include people who might have started in 2019 or 2020 and left before, up to the date, but just out of the 141 that were there in 2018, in the spring of 2018, 61% have left. I don't need to tell you why that's a large number or that it's very costly and of concern to the company even before this information was known, right? So what can network analysis help us do? Now, I know that this chart looks a little busy at first, and we definitely won't go through all of it, but I want you to see a few things here to understand how network analysis typically works. And so the small nodes are the people who have left, and the large nodes are the people who are there. So if you went through and totaled them all up, you'll find 141, you'll find 61% of those are the small nodes, right? And you can see that many of them were poorly connected back then and have since left. So that's one thing that you see in terms of the distribution of large and small. So that gives us an opportunity to say, what do we see when we look at the connections that the people have amongst them? Well, one thing we could notice is that the tech organization, which had a lot of software development, still have a lot of people there, but also have quite a few that have left. So the poorly connected people there have certainly left in quite large numbers. So in terms of departments, they were the ones who had the highest level of turnover. Another thing that you'll notice that should catch your eye is that the colors of the nodes are close to one another where there are connections. And what that's telling you is that the stronger connections tend to come from people who are in the same department. So people in sales tend to have their strongest connections with other people in sales, hence the connections. That's why they're closer to one another in the graph. But you'll notice that people from administration and from customer success are a bit more dispersed throughout the network. So you'll see that they were more likely to have connections that spanned these functional boundaries. And then the third thing to take note of real quickly is that you will always find a distribution of connections. There will be people who are poorly connected at any given point in time, say 0 or 1 connections, and you'll find people that are very highly connected. And if you look closely, you'll see several of those that are connected highly within their departments and highly across them. Right? So let's take a little bit of a closer look at the sales department to get a sense of what what org network analysis can allow us to do. Even though we could do this for the whole organization, we'll focus on one so that's a little less busy. Now, the thing that stands out, well, first, just say that the colors now represent different locations. So this is all the sales organization, but the colors represent locations. And the dotted circles tell you who are the formal leaders. And you can see as you look across that they tended to be well connected, right? There are very few formal leaders that don't have a lot of connections. There are a few that don't, but for the most part, they were well connected with other people in the group. But the thing that really stands out is how siloed the organization is by location. There's just a real absence of strong connections across these geographical boundaries. Right? Another thing that you'll notice, and there are more of them than just in the gray ellipse, but you've got a handful of people from almost every department, except every location except North America, who were connected to people across boundaries. So you see one large green circle in the gray ellipse that has connections very well to red. So that's between 2 of the Scandinavian countries. But again, we've even got we've got the 2 co-founders in this map. And even still, they weren't terribly well connected beyond their own group. So what we have here is a very fragmented organization when it comes to location, or at least with the sales department. So again, lots of information that can be extracted from here. And you can also see that, again, the people who were poorly connected 3 years ago were much more likely to leave. Let me show you some statistics on that. When we looked at turnover versus the connectedness, the people who were best connected, that is to say, who had the most boundary spanning connections in particular, had a much lower 50%, better than 50% lower. Let's say that the turnover compared to the people who were poorly connected. Right. So those who had 0 or 1 connection, that had no boundary spanning connections, they had a much higher turnover rate compared to those who were very well connected. And the same applies to promotions. When we look at those who stayed through 2020, blue represents best connected, and they had 50% more than 50% more promotions during the time that they stayed compared to those that were poorly connected. Same thing in 2019, although the difference wasn't as big. And same thing again for those who only stayed through 2018. Those that were poorly connected were promoted much less often than those that were better connected. And so that's just a quick example of the kinds of things that show you how connectedness matters in an organization. Here we define connectedness as the presence of boundary spanning connections, also ran it with just total number of connections or connected to well-connected others. It all comes back the same way. For these 2 measures of performance, we found very stark differences and of a kind that I'm not saying you couldn't find them in other ways, but it's something that was very easy to find out via the network analysis. Now, of course, we're not content to, and you wouldn't be content to just collect the data now and then say, well, come back in 3 years and let us know what you found on this. You want to be able to act on it now. And so that's what the practitioner literature does, is it takes these insights from the research, which has shown the kind of results that I just showed you, and say, what can we actually do to act upon this? What kind of interventions can we undertake? And this is what we do. We can manage the hubs. So we want to recognize and reward collaborative behavior, reduce collaborative overload. We want to connect the people on the periphery, particularly like connect new employees with subject matter experts, or find out what are the causes of their poor connectivity to the rest of the group. And also we want to pay attention to those in the gray ellipse who are the boundary spanners. We want to recognize and reward that behavior, maybe undertake strategic introductions to make sure that they are well connected or getting better connected with people across the organization, and also possibly even learn the techniques of network leadership, which is something that we offer in an online course and in customized courses. And so the point I want to leave you with is that retention and engagement, which we just talked about as a use case for O&A, is only one of at least a dozen where org network analysis is used regularly. The key is to understand which use case you're looking at. Is it diversity and inclusion? Is it onboarding? What are the goals that you're trying to achieve? And then finding the right relationship to design a study where you can map people's relationships and gain those insights. And we usually do those in short pilot studies to start with. And we would love to have the opportunity to talk with you about how to design a pilot study for your organization and show you ways in which you can start collecting and using network data. So I see that there are a few questions. I'm out of the presentation mode now. It says, very interesting, Dr. Hunter. It feels like the current structure of HR with business partners and subject matter experts is an unfortunate example of silos within the same teams. We connect more to other teams than to our own. Do you see that as a problem or an efficient way to keep expertise in teams? That's a very nice question. I hope I'm pronouncing it correct. Alsu. There's this term that's used in the academic sociology literature. It's called homophily, which means that it's like attracting like. And so this is the tendency that Musk was talking about in his email. It's a very natural tendency for us to communicate with those to whom we are psychologically close and physically close. And so one of the things that you can look at in organizational network analysis is how well people are interacting across physical boundaries like location. And so this notion of trying to distribute expertise broadly often starts with identifying the people who are doing the good job already without having been assigned that, to bridge those silos. So you'll find there are people who are already doing it that just sort of fits with their personality or their personal mandate. And that is something that we help organizations find those people, identify them, and then to build on that. There are some questions in the tab as well. Can you see a difference of cross-geography relatedness between functional areas? My guess would be that it is less important in the sales function than in some other functions. Mia, that's a really good question, is how much data can you layer in one graph at a time? So yes, you can look at location or geography, you can look at function, you can look at the combination of the two. And sometimes that's easy to do mathematically, empirically in a model, but it's a little tougher to represent because the graphs can get very busy very quickly. Raphael asks, I wonder your opinion about workplace analytics to carry out this analysis. Great question. We are actively gathering data like that. And we help companies use that. So we collect data from Workplace by Facebook, or by Microsoft Teams and so on. So these are excellent sources of information. Right, someone asked workplace analytics to carry this out. Do you implement experiments to get at more causal relationships? Is there a business case for causality? Thanks, Tunde. Yes, we do, although many times to sort of tease out causality means developing empirical or statistical models, which I certainly know how to do, but which are often a little bit difficult to translate. So we're looking for things that are actionable, right? And so sometimes the things that we know from best practice are good to act on. may or may not necessarily work their way into a causal empirical model. But we certainly try. I usually do that and have it in the back and sometimes put it in the appendix of a report. How do you get the right data? That I'm gonna defer on that one for a few minutes because I have a coming up in a few moments will be the roundtable, and we can talk about that there, as well as how do you measure too much collaboration. Sometimes it's you have to ask people, or you start a conversation about that. Are they seeing, or do they feel like it's too much? I think I got all of the questions for now. I'm sorry that I couldn't interact or engage with you and see your faces. It's always a little bit tough to do this, but I certainly appreciate your questions. Again, I will have a roundtable starting up in just a few moments, and I'll be glad to take more of your questions there if you can make it over there, and we can then engage in a more of a conversation. So I think I'm over time, and I'm going to try and stop now. And of course, I'm happy to share these slides with you if anyone needs them or requests them. We can certainly make those available. So again, thank you, and I'll just stop here if Saranda says that's the thing to do.